It's the last one for the week, and this is Business Morning. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
While the economy has entered into recession in this third quarter, the trend of the growth suggests that this will be a short-lived recession, and indeed, by the fourth or at worst the first quarter of 2021, that the country will exit recession. The National Bureau of Statistics had earlier on forecasted that Nigeria will close with a negative growth of minus 4.4%. But the third quarter performance shows that this trend will not be so. Let me also remind us that the 2016 recession lasted for 5 quarters. And if trends continue, the current recession may just last for 1 quarter. Our expectations of a quick exit, which will be historically fast, is anchored on the several complementary fiscal, real sector and monetary interventions that have been proactively introduced by government to forestall a far worse decline of the economy and alleviate the negative consequences of the pandemic. While there is always a lag between intervention and outcome, we can already see the benefits on the economy as recorded in this third quarter GDP report. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind us that these are difficult times and that the government had to take some very difficult decisions. There are some reforms that have been taken that could not be taken for years. And while we recognize that things are very difficult, let us encourage the people that are working on these reforms so that they can have the strength to continue. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that even though we're not out of the woods, and given the adverse impact of COVID-19, we have to continue to work together to implement the measures to get our economy back on track.
Finance Minister Zainab Ahmed sounding very optimistic there about Nigeria getting out of the present recession. Nigeria officially entered into a recession over the weekend following the release of the third quarter GDP numbers, which showed gross domestic product contracted by 3.62%. Mrs. Ahmed was speaking at the just concluded Nigeria Economic Summit held in Abuja with the theme Building Partnerships for Resilience. Being optimistic is one thing, working towards achieving the targeted goals is another. I'm going to have this conversation with a financial and management consultant and the CEO of Flame Academy and Consulting, Mr. Oji Udemezue. Thank you very much, Mr. Udemezue. It's always a pleasure to have you on the
pleasure is actually mine. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you listened to the finance minister sounding very optimistic about Nigeria's economic growth. The CBN governor, too, while he was briefing on the House, absolutely, he was very optimistic. Do you also share, this optimism?
Well, it's healthy to be optimistic.
Absolutely.
And leaders ought always to be optimistic. And nobody likes to, project doom. But it's one thing to be optimistic, like you've said already, and another thing to do what you need to do to get to that optimistic position where you want to be. So what I want to share in the optimism, cautiously, knowing that, the level of decline in the economy in the third quarter wasn't as bad as it was in the previous quarter. That's the second quarter, where we had almost as bad as a decline of 6%. So if you project on that trend, you could see that maybe in the first quarter or second quarter of 2021, I don't think first quarter is likely to be it, because if you look at the COVID outlook, you find that there is some fear about the second wave of that. Already, some parts of Europe are already on lockdown, and America is still struggling, with their politics going on to see whether there should be lockdown in some places or further restrictions and all of that. And once you have these restrictions, activities around the world will slow down, and that also impacts economies around the world negatively.
I guess part of what is spurring this optimism is the vaccine news.
Yeah, the news of the vaccine, of course, Pfizer and other.
It's not just,
all right, okay.
Yeah, the optimism is not just locally here. It's also globally. The global economy is very optimistic. We can see what's happening in the oil market.
Of course, the news of the vaccine had just, shot up the price a bit.
Even the global stock markets have been reacting
to that.
positively to that. So perhaps it's a time to be positive. But then Nigeria is a peculiar case. We have quite a lot of issues to deal with.
Yep.
Yes, she says if not in fourth quarter, then first quarter of 2021. Then I don't know what will happen in fourth quarter. Are we ever considering the fallout of the NSAS protests, the destructions?
Of course, the NSAS protests also slowed down the economy in a number of ways. And you look at what's happening now, there's very prevailing insecurity around the country. So economic activities have not, as much as you want to say it, picked up very well in the country. So things are still a bit dull, the way things are going. And there is, hardship everywhere. Domestic spend is, aggregate demand domestically is very weak at this point. People are hurting. People have lost jobs. Companies are closing down. There are challenges everywhere. Supply chains are cut off. And, even the supply of input materials are, at this point, at this lowest level. Even though oil price is picking up, but the impact is not yet felt. And, of course, you know that as that price continues to go up, we feel negative impact in the time, in the sense of the petroleum product, price increase, because there's no more subsidy. So as we see, even though we hope for oil price increase, but for Nigeria, it's ironical, because even when the oil price increases, improving our revenue as a country, enabling us to spend more to be able to drive the economy, you find that it's also going to drive inflation further, because now we're in that regime where subsidy has been almost removed. And once oil price starts going up, you see the fuel price also going up, and with it, you find more crisis. Labour and ASU are already in crisis mode with government, and these things will continue because Nigeria continues to be an economy depending only on oil. And even in that dependence on oil, we are unable to harness this oil or non-renewable energy resource to our benefit. You can imagine a country like Nigeria, going so low to be importing petroleum products from Nigeria Republic. That's to me is not only unpatriotic, but it's almost criminal and an impeachable, action. It's quite sad. Where we have refineries that, are much bigger than whatever you have in Nigeria Republic times 20.
Well, perhaps very soon that can be, corrected now that we have modular refery coming up. At least we have one.
When are they going to start?
At least one has started now. One has started, and hopefully by first quarter of next year, perhaps we'll have Dangote refinery. Yes,
let's be hopeful.
I like being. Let
me also say this. Yeah? In as much as we try to be optimistic about, exiting recession, it is not just enough. To exit recession is not what this country needs. When you exit and you come to a positive figure, remember that our population growth is still happening at above 3%. So when we continue to we've had a very fragile growth in the past years. In fact, post-2016, when we had our last recession, before this one now came upon us because of COVID, you find that our growth has been very, very fragile and has not been able to support the creation of prosperity around the country. Poverty is still prevalent because as long as your economy continues to grow at a rate lower than your population grows, what it means that every single day, thousands of people are going deeper down into extreme poverty every day.
And the misery index continues to rise.
Yeah, the index that captures your inflation and unemployment and all of that, it keeps getting worse and worse. So it's not going to be El Dorado or big news, we have existed. It's not enough. What we should see is an economy that should be moving towards its potential of growing at nothing less than double digit of 10%, annual GDP, real GDP growth. That's what we should be boasting about, not to boast about exiting recession. And how do we get there? So many things need to happen. We need to begin to focus on this, a country. Begin to look at things that benefit us as a nation. You can see the implosion happening everywhere, the disenchantment, the anger from South. Recently they met with the president saying, we want our resources to be used to develop our region. The way this government is running, there is so much infighting, there's so much discontent, there's so much anger everywhere. And if it's not corrected to unite this country and begin to look at things that that are in the best interest of this nation, we are getting to that point of a big crisis.
Now let's look at. She talked about the measures that are being put in place, and I want to believe is some of those measures that is contained in the Economic Sustainability Plan. We have the SME Survival Fund, Youth Investment, Fund. So, talking about this recession and then looking at these measures. So,
It is beginning to dawn on us. Everybody now knows that there's no way the government on their own can drive economic growth, reasonable and impressive economic growth. So it's beginning to dawn on us that we need to have that partnership. If you look at the recent, that's the Nigerian Economic Summit Group 26th, summit that just held this week too, the topic talking about partnership for resilient growth. You find that it's imperative for government of today to begin to see the importance of involving the private sector in one form or the other to drive this economy. So when you say, youth funding, CBN has a few projects and all of that, the point is, are you really serious about driving it down to the grassroots? Or as usual, we make national announcements on national television and then the modalities for driving this down so that the people in the villages can feel the impact of these cheap and affordable funds to drive entrepreneurship. Because it's clear that without SMEs or micro, small and medium enterprises, we can't go anywhere in terms of creating jobs and driving economic growth. So how do we allow access to infrastructure, affordable power? You can see how energy costs has almost doubled. And who are going to suffer it the most? The plumber in the street, those small businesses that are already struggling to survive. They are taking much higher cost now. Even they don't even see the energy. But when they see it, it's very costly. They can't run. People who are running all kinds of micro enterprises in the villages cannot operate at this point. It's quite expensive. Some of them have eaten up their capital during the lockdown, and they're having to face very unsurmountable amount of expenditure in their businesses. So, and of course, that will also, hurt our revenue generation through taxes in this country. So it's a very bad situation in this country, and this is the time we need very, efficient and bold and honest leadership, much more than ever before.
Yeah, you talked about public and private partnership, and you did mention the NEST 26 that just ended. Yes, we've had this forum, Nigerian Economic Forum. I mean, that's the biggest.
Over 2 decades, yeah.
Absolutely. This is the 26th edition, if I'll call it. And then a question a lot of people would ask, this communique that come out from this forum, what do they do with it? What the government, how do they take some of these communique? Do you think whatever it is that come out, the discussions, the agreement, and all of that is being taken seriously? If it is, should we be where we are now?
There is no doubt that that summit, always gathers the best of the best in this country in terms of economic thoughts. So I hail that summit. It's a good initiative, and they should keep it up. They always make sure they gather, people to give ideas to this government. But in a political economy, politics is always one side of the divide, and economics is the other side. When people who have these economic ideas bring them up, do we have leaders who have the political will, the moral, imperative to take action based on these recommendations? Nigeria has never lacked in terms of human capital, thought leaders who make quality, recommendations about what to do to make this economy work. We have a very brilliant economic council that was celebrated about a year or two ago that are led by very well-known economists in this country. But where are they today? These guys will make recommendations, and you wonder whether the leaders, the political leaders we have in this country, right from federal level to state level, whether they actually listen or implement this. What happened? How did we wake up and hear that contracts are being awarded for rails to Niger Republic and other kinds of expenditure going that route? Was it discussed at National Assembly? Did the government seek the counsel of the, this summit or the economic advisor? So you find that there's a disconnect between those who recommend these policies and those who decide to spend our money. There's a problem, and people seem to be running, on interests that are outside the national interest. There seems to be unpatriotic and parochial interests that are overshadow the whole national interest, and that's why people are saying that until we begin to allocate our resources efficiently, maybe through a proper fiscal and even geographical federalism, to give the impetus on the state governments or regional governments to drive their growth, to think like entrepreneurs. Because today, everybody, every month, they run to Abuja to get handout from the FAC allocation. And when they get broke, they go there for bailout. And nobody takes responsibility for trying to see how we can look at around our environment, whether you are in the south, or in the Benue region, or anywhere you are, to find out whether it's agriculture, or whether it is solid mineral, or whether it is coal, or whether any kind of resource, or even human capital, how we can bring out the best doctors, best engineers, What do we have in our region? Is it onions? How can we, how can we export these things? So people can begin to think or handle to raise revenue. But when the whole thing goes to the federal center, where we also have leaders who are not thinking federal, it's a big problem. So Nigeria is in a very tight corner, in a, almost like, an implosion. If nothing is done in terms of quality leadership, this country, God forbid, is at the point of, breaking, at the break point. And that's why you see agitations everywhere. Recently, leaders of the South went to say, how can you use our resources to be develop the whole, other regions, and in fact, other nations, when we are very troubled in our region, in terms of infrastructure and other things. So these things must be addressed at this point. And this is the point, and even with the NSAS protest, it's becoming glaring that something must be done in the way this country is run.
Part of the conversation there at the economic summit is how to also bring the youths into, scheme of things.
Not just to say it. In fact, I expect that if we are serious about this, I challenge the People Democratic Party and the APC and other parties that are emerging to give minimum of 50% slot to young people in this country. Not even, I don't know whether I'm even that qualified again to answer the youth, but people who are much younger than I am should be allowed platform to express themselves in the political journey we're making in 2023. It's not about grandstanding. They should make it happen. You should make the ticket easier, cheaper for people who haven't, packed our money in bags. Money bag politics should be dropped at this point. And the young people, not just youth, because we have some of the guys we have today, where I don't want to call names.
Youths that have something to offer. Anyway,
many guys that we have today, I don't want to call names, we are much younger. They were at something when they became speakers and governors of their states. They were youth, quite all right. Today, what have they contributed to national development? Well, they might have done something, but is it enough as the young people who are dynamic? And we keep blaming the old soldiers for causing our problem and insisting on not getting that problem solved. So we don't just need youth. We need, resourceful, diligent, honest, and, cerebral youth, people who can think out solutions and who can act honestly for this nation. Nigeria needs to be rescued from the jaws of death at this point.
Now, do you think there is need for not just the government, but a total reorientation of even us as individuals?
I agree.
To reorientate ourselves, the way we do things.
Yep.
Even the way you manage your own self, the way you manage your home, also tells how you manage maybe the larger society.
Self-leadership. I call it self-leadership. While we all castigate or speak harshly about those who are in Abuja and the states, how are we, how are you, how am I, leading my own business in my corporate circle? How am I leading in my community? Am I driving towards the common good in my community? How am I leading in my church or in my mosque? How am I leading in my family? Are we, fostering discipline? Are we getting sure that people do what they ought to do, whether they like it or not? Are we encouraging bad behavior? Are we coming, indiscipline? So leadership has to be, brought down to the lower level. What we do, even in the streets. Do you jump traffic? Are you following me? Do you stay in the queue when you go for an? So how do you behave everywhere you find yourself? Are you dishonest the way you run your affairs? Do you lie a lot? Do you scheme to bring people down? In your offices, do you promote others to? Do you share knowledge? And all of that. So it's high time Nigeria began to look at these critical issues. How do we lead ourselves and in our own corners? And how do we ensure that we create common good everywhere we are in our offices? Human capital is so critical. And that's the focus of the last World Bank IMF meeting where we talk about, enhancing talent, investing in people. This country also needs to invest a lot in people. The educational sector, the health sector must be given their due, attention at this point. So when we talk about, coming out of recession, the important thing is while we fight to come out of it, what are we going to do to sustain reasonable growth and development in this economy? There's so much to invest in, and that we cannot afford to waste any resource at this point in time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Odemeze. Let's continue to be optimistic.
We will be.
Everything will be all right.
Get better. We hope so.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's always a pleasure having you on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Haji Odemeze is the CEO of Flame Academy and Consulting. Well, it's still about bringing Nigeria out of the woods. Senior economist and head of research and strategy at Greenwich Merchant Bank, Ayodeji Abel, next.